It's a sin to kill a mockingbird. Imagine being a young writer who has left everything familiar, your home, your job, your safety net, and moved to New York City to write a single novel. Imagine betting your whole future on it. That was Harper Lee in the 1950s. She had one shot. If she failed, there may not be another. And the book she pinned her fate to kill a mockingbird. Her gamble paid off, big time. The novel didn't just succeed, it became one of the most beloved novels in American history. But what saved her career and sealed her reputation wasn't only the courtroom drama or the unforgettable characters. It was a single idea condensed into one unforgettable passage. Let's kick off with a full passage we're assessing. Atticus said to Jem one day, "I'd rather you shot at tin cans in the backyard, but I know you'll go after birds. Shoot all the blue jays you want, if you can hit them. But remember, it's a sin to kill a mockingbird." That was the only time I ever heard Atticus say it was a sin to do something. And I asked Miss Maudie about it. "Your father's right," she said. "Mockingbirds don't do one thing but make music for us to enjoy. They don't eat up people's gardens, don't nest in corn cribs. They don't do one thing but sing their hearts out for us. That's why it's a sin to kill a mockingbird." For those who tuned out during this lesson in high school, you might be wondering, why this section? The most obvious reason is that it's the title-explaining passage. It crystallizes much of what Mockingbird is about. Innocence, morality, empathy. How about the argument that placement is part of prose? This teaching moment arrives around the novel's midway point, chapter 10, close to the Mad Dog scene and before the trial reaches full boil. Harper Lee's background gives further insight. Harper was born in Monroeville, Alabama, and grew up seeing racial injustice. Much of Mockingbird was based on her observations. By the mid-1950s, she had left her job in New York to write full-time, living off the support of friends. If this book didn't land, she'd just be another failed novelist. Okay, let's cut into this literary sausage so you can see how it was made. Part 1. Everyday words. Eternal weight. Atticus said to Jem one day, "I'd rather you shot at tin cans in the backyard, but I know you'll go after birds." You might be thinking, this father-son chat doesn't exactly scream immortal wisdom. The prose is casual and conversational, coming across as almost a throwaway line. But look closer. Yes, grammatically it's ordinary, but that's the trick. The phrase grounds us. We're not in a courtroom or a cathedral. We're in the flow of domestic life. It demythologizes the moment, which of course is Harper Lee's entire strategy. This is why writing one day is significant. It could be any day, just an offhand moment. But Scout plucks it out of the blur of childhood because it becomes monumental. It suggests this is one of many such father lessons, something that started chill but became profound. It signals our first-person narrator, Scout's retrospective voice. She's telling us what's stuck, and the casual entry lets the language do the heavy lifting later. In this way, the prose works in two times at once, the child hearing it and the adult Scout remembering it. Note how the syntax also mirrors her dad, Atticus's, parenting style. Calm, understated, never preaching. This continues with, "I'd rather you shot at tin cans." It's colloquial, concrete imagery. It conveys a parental patience with a hint of exasperation. If we stretch our scrutiny out to tin cans in the backyard, we see the evocation of childhood play and harmless roughness. Choosing tin cans, not bottles, not targets, but cheap disposable cans, signals the banality of childhood mischief. Harper Lee chooses this to contrast beautifully with what comes next, the move from the mundane to the moral. This is achieved with the pivot, "but I know you'll go after birds." Notice the resigned rhythm of "I know." Atticus is both realist and parent. It sets up an anticipated misbehavior, a leap from harmless clinking cans to living things, and carries metaphorical potential, a shift from play to something potent. One clause, one hinge word, and we've entered the moral territory of the novel. Part 2, the famous line, and its echo. Next, Atticus drops a line everyone remembers. "Shoot all the blue jays you want, if you can hit them. But remember, it's a sin to kill a mockingbird." The line winks at us. The conditional undercuts the swagger. Also notice M, not them, a dialectical contraction that keeps Atticus human and homely, not sermonizing. Next, the rhythm. It's long, but it breathes naturally thanks to those commas. Harper Lee was a master of letting syntax imitate speech. It sounds exactly like a parent giving instructions, a bit lenient, a bit conditional, then bang, the prohibition. Now let's look at the verbs shoot, hit, kill. Harper Lee doesn't soften things with euphemisms. It's brutal honesty, and the verbs sharpen and harden. It's an escalation. This sentence is the emotional thematic core. It's not over-explained either, but the metaphoric seed is planted. And why blue jays? Well, they're the noisy, sometimes destructive, bullies of the bird world. Atticus essentially says, fine, waste your bullets on the loudmouths. Then, before we can relax, he hits us with the "but remember." Two little words that flip the sentence. Grammatically, that "but" is the fulcrum of the entire novel. Permission gives way to prohibition, which is when we land on the Mockingbird. Growing up in Monroeville, Harper Lee was immersed in Southern culture, where hunting was common practice and birds were a part of daily life. The choice of tin cans, blue jays, and mockingbirds comes straight out of her lived experience. But let's hone in on the mockingbird. That single bird becomes the moral symbol of the story: innocence, beauty, and song. This is where Atticus employs the strongest moral language in the book, using the word sin, not for lying, stealing, or swearing, but for harming innocence. That redefinition is the paragraph's ethical coup. In the following line, Scout points out how this is the only time she ever heard him say the word. Harper Lee saves it for maximum effect. Economical, precise, and unforgettable, which is where style meets theme. Atticus's advice isn't really about birds. It foreshadows Tom Robinson and Boo Radley, the innocence destroyed by cruelty. The mockingbird becomes a metaphor for the characters of Tom and Boo. Incidentally, here's a quick tip. If you want to lessen your perception as the town boogeyman and your name is a shout people use to jump scare others, maybe consider changing it. The point is that this part serves as a foreshadowing of the central conflict, which revolves around harm to the innocent, social prejudice, and moral courage. Harper Lee uses this passage to lay the theme's groundwork. But, like everything Atticus says to Jem, it's not framed as lofty philosophy. It's backyard talk about blue jays. That's the genius of the prose. Plain diction, small-scale images, but a universal moral embedded. Notice too the sound design. Sin to kill a mockingbird. The S and K sounds scrape. Mockingbird lengthens the breath. It's memorable because it's musical, and because Harper Lee withholds the theological register until exactly now. Harper Lee once said she didn't write To Kill a Mockingbird to be a message novel, even though it's full of moral lessons. Consider then how this ties directly to Atticus's offhand delivery of the Mockingbird line. It's not a sermon. It's fatherly advice. Harper Lee's choice to present morals conversationally instead of dogmatically reflects her own dislike of heavy-handedness. Part 2 continued. Scout's reflection and Miss Maudie's backup. That was the only time I ever heard Atticus say it was a sin to do something, and I asked Miss Maudie about it. That phrase, say it was a sin to do something, is kind of awkward, repetitive, and vague, but it's brilliant because it sounds like a child remembering. Scout doesn't yet have elegant phrasing. And here's the key. Harper Lee could write more gracefully. She was capable of lush description, but thanks to some editorial guidance, she chose not to. She filtered the memory through Scout's clumsy honesty. Harper Lee worked closely with her editor, Tay Hohoff, at Lippincott. Beyond the often discussed title change from Go Set a Watchman, Hohoff helped Harper rework the manuscript to preserve Scout's childlike narration and to frame Atticus's lesson through Scout's voice, highlighting the contrast between Atticus's adult clarity and Scout's youthful perspective. This shift was significant. After all, the book was originally written from an entirely adult perspective. When Hohoff convinced Harper Lee to rebuild the book from Scout's child's eye POV, it spurred on these wobbly, truthful lines. Without that editorial shaping, this paragraph wouldn't sing the way it does. Look also at the intensifiers in this line, only and ever. The syntax stacks rarity. The phrase to do something is then fascinating because it's deliberately vague. The line then concludes with, and I asked Miss Maudie about it. The community chorus. Atticus pronounces, Miss Maudie explains. That structure matters. The novel consistently socializes truth. Wisdom doesn't sit in a pulpit. It echoes on porches. Miss Maudie's function here is hermeneutic. Hermeneutic, a method of interpreting meaning, especially in texts. She interprets Atticus for the children and for us in plain speech. Hence, she never uses the word hermeneutic. I mentioned earlier that Harper Lee grew up in Monroeville, Alabama, but what I didn't reveal yet was that she was the daughter of Amasa Colin Lee, a lawyer whose character and cases words helped inspire Atticus. So, an attorney father's measured language plus a porch culture chorus becomes the book's tonal DNA. And so Miss Maudie, a secondary character, steps in to help us understand why Atticus singles out the Mockingbird. She also gives us distance. Scout needs an explanation, which invites the reader to join. "Your father's right," she said. "Mockingbirds don't do one thing but make music for us to enjoy. They don't eat up people's gardens, don't nest in corn cribs. They don't do one thing but sing their hearts out for us. That's why it's a sin to kill a mockingbird." Look at that list of don'ts. The triple repetition builds rhythm. It's cumulative. Grammatically, this is negative definition, a paradoxical technique that underlines innocence by subtracting offenses. Because look, they don't harm, don't damage, don't intrude. Structurally, it's almost biblical, a litany, a negative definition of purity. This is also metered prose. Read it aloud and feel the soft alliteration. M in make music. The S sound in us is also like a hush after Atticus's harder consonants. It's not poetry. It's prose that behaves poetically. Another grammatical note is the striking way that the only affirmative verb attached to the mockingbird is sing. Everything else is what it refuses to do: devour, intrude, damage. The prose corrals meaning by excluding harm and then allows one radiant verb. And then she ends where Atticus did. That's why it's a sin to kill a mockingbird. The passage folds back on itself. This structure mirrors the teaching process, giving it explanation and authority. Rule, question, justification. Clean, balanced, satisfying. Put another way, Atticus plants the seed, Miss Maudie explains the roots, and Scout records the memory. Harper grew up listening to elders interpret the world for children. In a small southern town, wisdom often arrived in ordinary conversation, on porches, and in kitchens. She captures that cadence here. Simple, authoritative, communal. In a 1963 interview, Harper described Mockingbird less as an indictment and more as a plea for decency at home. This passage reflects her intention, moral instruction, and not in a didactic sense. Didactic writing that tries to teach a moral lesson in an overly direct or preachy way, rather than letting the story convey its meaning naturally. Part 3. The Question of Perfection. The book sold in the millions. It won the Pulitzer Prize. It became required reading across classrooms, generations, and continents. Overnight, Harper Lee's gamble turned into one of the greatest triumphs in American literature. But does it qualify as perfect prose? Or is it just really, really good? The passage moves from premise to injunction to reflection to moral explanation, a small arc of its own, embedded in a larger plot, and it nails clarity. It's readable by a 12-year-old and a literature professor alike. The syntax mirrors real speech, but still carries rhythm. The diction is simple, but freighted with meaning. It builds character too. Atticus as measured, Miss Maudie as wise, Scout as curious, all in a single passage. And thematically, it foreshadows the novel's tragedy and moral lessons without tipping its hand too early. After all, it's the latter parts of the novel that will complicate Atticus's world. But that's by design. This passage is a statement, a lesson, a full spectrum. Having said all that, what resonates powerfully for one reader may seem heavy-handed or sentimental to another. And yes, the mockingbird metaphor has been taught to so many generations that it can feel like a bumper sticker. Such is the price of fame. This passage comes about as close to perfect prose as you can get. What do you think? Do you think it's perfect? Comment below with your reasons and what you love, or maybe what you don't. Let's have that conversation. Perhaps perfect prose is impossible. The pursuit, however, it's where the fun is. Read on!